And we will start with the business issues, GDPR and customer trust. Please, Jan, launch your presentation. Yeah, double tick. Okay. Good.
Okay, great. Well, good morning, and I'm delighted to be here in Latvia for the Digital Era conference. It is my first time visiting your country, and I find Riga to be absolutely beautiful. It's also the first time I've spoken after 3 ministers of justice, so I'm a little bit intimidated to be up here after the illustrious speakers you just heard from. And I should also say, because I didn't take my headset, I really don't know what most of the people were saying in the introductions. As our host said, I do 2 things. I'm co-chair of Fedma, which represents 21 DMAs in Brussels on legislative issues, so in particular GDPR, e-privacy, consumer rights legislation. And we do have a Latvian DMA led by Alvis Dimitris, who I think is here today. So if you have a chance, do say hello to him. And then I also run the UK DMA, which includes a training and education division, the Institute of Direct and Digital Marketing, the Trade Association, a division focused on emerging talent, and a consumer protection division that runs the mailing preference service and the telephone preference service. And within the DMA network, we've actually been focused on the issues of data and marketing for almost 100 years in different countries around the world. So from our heritage and traditional data-driven channels like mail and telephone, and the new modern digital channels, which are essentially all data-driven channels. Now, as we've heard, the context in which we gather today is one of dramatic change as we move deeper into the 4th industrial revolution, powered by data, powerful technology, and augmented intelligence. A new world of possibility where big data analytics can be deployed to tackle society's greatest challenges, but also a world that throws up huge challenges for business, governments, and people. Now, it is clear that the economic growth in Europe and Europe's competitiveness with the world will increasingly rely on leadership in data, technology, and marketing. In the UK, BCG estimates that the internet economy accounts for over 10% of GDP, growing at 32% a year. Nesta estimates that digital technology contributes £160 billion to the UK economy, 1.56 million jobs, with 12% of them in data management and analytics. And these are high-quality jobs in the knowledge economy. The opportunities to use technology and data to transform government services, cure disease, create new business models, offer new experiences, new knowledge, and new convenience to people is amazing. And the people we serve, they are citizens accessing modern, digitally driven government services, and they're also consumers interacting with brands in new and different ways. Now, in this era of augmented intelligence and machine learning, the technology at your disposal and at the disposal of your customers is more powerful than ever. But with powerful technology comes great responsibility. You will all be responsible for training the AI that will work on your behalf to create great experiences for your customers. It is your responsibility to create ethical frameworks in which your technology operates. You are now more than marketers. You are philosophers responsible for anticipating and mitigating the behaviors of self-learning machines. So, in short, you are not just responsible for your company's short-term sales and long-term brand loyalty. It is not just enough to be a successful and responsible marketer. You must now become ethical marketers, philosophers with a responsibility to society and not just to your company. And as we've heard people say, we must ensure that people, the citizens of our countries, feel safe in the new economy and that they benefit from new products and services. Now, to understand this trend better, we have been fielding since 2012 a customer attitudes to privacy study in the UK, tracking evolution in people's interaction with data. And for the first time, launched yesterday, we fielded the study in 10 countries around the world, covering Europe, North America, South America, and Asia. And I'm going to take you through some of those findings so that we can look at the discussion from the point of view of customers. And what I think is the biggest surprise that we got out of this finding, because we have markets of different cultural heritages and different economic backgrounds, everything from Argentina to Singapore to Canada to the US to Spain, Germany, France, UK, very different countries. What we find is broad consistency, a huge amount of consistency in people's interaction with the data-driven economy. So first, we looked at broadly different types of people. So not all consumers are equal. Attitudes to privacy span a broad range, which varies not just by individual, but product type and situation, which we broadly group into three segments: the pragmatists, the fundamentalists, and the unconcerned. And actually, as marketers, and marketers who are used to segmentation strategies, we think you should know your own customer base and how it splits, because if you have an audience that skews heavily towards fundamentalist, you may treat your approach to privacy differently than if your audience is primarily unconcerned. So how are these audiences? Well, the fundamentalists are the least willing to provide personal information, even in exchange for services, and certainly only with brands they completely trust. Now, the good news for marketers is that this group has gotten smaller, 31% down to 25% in the UK. And in really all countries, you can see in the red, ranges really essentially between 22 and 27%, with one exception being Singapore, where they have a more evolved and accepting data-driven economy. In terms of the unconcerned, these are people who are not too worried and comfortable with the data exchange. Again, that ranges from about 18% up to 35%. And then broadly speaking in the middle, roughly half of people overall are pragmatists. Those in the center ground who will make trade-offs depending on the service or the enhancement of the service offered. And the key point here is if you look at the pragmatist plus unconcerned in most countries, you're really looking at about 3/4 of the population, which tells us something quite interesting. And almost 2/3 of people believe that sharing data is part of the modern economy. So the data exchange is here to stay. And more importantly, people are becoming increasingly aware, and if they weren't aware when this study was fielded, which was back in November and December, they certainly are after the 3 weeks of activity around GDPR compliance in Europe. I'm not sure what happened to France here, with only 39% more aware of how data is collected, but really, mostly we're looking at numbers above 65%. And increasingly, people are becoming comfortable, more comfortable than they were previously. But those numbers, I think, as you'll see, are still reasonably low. And I think that's where we in the industry have to be very concerned, because despite the growing comfort level in the data exchange, people also say they have concerns about the data exchange. And surprisingly, in the US, which has a different regulatory environment than we do in Europe, 82% of people are quite concerned about the data exchange. And the two things that people tell us they want more than anything, and you can see the consistency in these numbers across the 10 markets, people want more transparency about how data is collected and used. And they want more control of the personal information they give companies and the way it is stored. Very high numbers, over 80% in almost all countries. And I think for industry, this is a big concern on this slide. The majority of people in all countries believe that business is getting the most value from the data exchange. And I think for a successful economy going forward, people, your customers, have to feel that they are equally benefiting from the modern data-driven economy. And I think that brings us for a moment back to GDPR, because GDPR is a legislation that asks people to be more open, transparent, and accountable, which is really what people are telling us they want in the next phase of digital transformation. So rather than seeing GDPR as a legal hurdle to be vaulted, organizations are now beginning to see the benefit of new laws in enhancing customer offering and building consumer trust. And in fact, we've been tracking every 3 or 4 months companies' attitudes to implementing GDPR and are publishing our Chapter 5 today. 52% of companies in our membership are now saying they see GDPR as a benefit, up from 34% only a few months ago. And we heard one of the ministers talk about the aspiration of a global approach to data protection and privacy. And Microsoft, for instance, announced this week that they are going to use the essential elements of GDPR for all their customers all across the world. So that's really the context. Businesses are starting to embrace GDPR after a huge moment of concern and fear about the impact of the legislation. And I think another thing that we need to recognize, people believe, no matter what the lawyers tell you or what esoteric arguments you can have with your colleagues or your legal advisors, people believe that data is their property, and they're more and more aware of how they can exchange it for value in the modern economy. And what do they want to change it for? Well, the majority of people, you won't be surprised to know, across the world, will exchange data in exchange for direct benefits. Benefits like financial rewards, free products or services, loyalty points, or discounts. So here we see across the countries, it seems in Argentina, people like direct financial rewards more than in the Netherlands. Entirely free products and services rates quite highly. Loyalty points, I think people are very comfortable with things like airline points and points from retailers. And I think the great thing of the modern era, if you think about things like couponing and discounting historically, often we received offers for products that we had no interest in. Today, through loyalty programs in retailers, you really get discounts on things you actually buy, which is, of course, much more useful than discounts on things that you don't buy. And here we see that people do feel, although not yet half of people, that they get improved service in exchange for the data they share. Now, as companies, you really would want to believe that if you're collecting people's data and offering relevant services and products, offering new services, that people would see that they are getting value. And what I wanted to come back to is trust. Trust is absolutely the single most important reason of why people will share data with companies. So becoming a trusted brand, and here I circle back because I started my career in brand advertising many, many years ago before becoming a data and technology-driven marketer. And the brands that are trusted and the importance of brand values and a brand's attitude and approach to privacy is going to be more important as we go further into the digital era. So the importance of brands in a data-driven world is an interesting convergence. Now, we also looked at, because we know that in the internet evolved very much with free services and the belief that services should be free. But of course, you do pay for those services with your data, and that poses risks. We are tracking now willingness to pay for services as an option, and I think that's one of the essential ingredients to more control. If you had a choice of whether to get it free or to pay a subscription, say $9.95 a month, and you consciously make the decision, you find out what the value is, you have a number in your mind, and secondly, you have a choice, and choice is the essential prerequisite to control. And now what's happening, and I call it the Netflix effect, people are becoming comfortable paying for subscriptions that keep data within the company that they're doing business with, but enabling that company to use their information and knowledge to make more relevant movies, better experiences, better choices, but not letting the data leave their own first-party environment. And that's why you see under TV, movie, and streaming services, 34% of people are willing to pay. And this is across the countries really replicated. And I think a final one that I thought was quite interesting is in the blue bar, you'll see the number of people who say that they have the primary responsibility for their data security. Then the orange bar, government institutions, the red bar, brands and organization, and then a combination. So if you look, say, in Germany, 49% of people believe they're ultimately responsible, plus 27% who think it's a shared responsibility. And what people are saying is they don't feel they need to live in a nanny state. They feel that they themselves have personal responsibility. And this is an important slide with GDPR here. I think if we fielded this study now in the month of May, these numbers would be higher. But these are people are becoming more and more aware of their rights and responsibilities. So that's a quick look at what people think in the run-up to GDPR implementation. If we are to build trust and address customer concerns about transparency and control, companies must be accountable for your decisions. You must think about the effect of what you're doing on your customers. You must be clear as to why you think you are helping your customers rather than harming them. So be honest with yourselves and your colleagues. Maybe a small tweak to the delivery of a service or the communication plan shifts the results from harmful to helpful. And tools exist, as we've heard, to enable good decisions to be taken, decisions that harness innovation while mitigating risk. Of course, privacy impact assessments, legitimate interest impact assessments, and privacy by design are some examples. Now, these terms, these tools, force companies to think about their customers in relation to their business. And that's good marketing. Marketing that will create trust in your brand, that will create long-term brand loyalty and increase the lifetime value of your customer. In building trust, the aims of GDPR and the aims of companies are aligned in a single purpose. And in this framework, trade associations play a critical role in helping members understand how acting ethically builds trust and creates long-term value for brands. So at the DMA UK and at Fedma, we have established an ethical code to guide our industry through these changing times. And GDPR does have sections that contain a specific roles and responsibilities for industry codes of practice. And in that context, the Fedma code to data-driven marketing is the only industry code that was ever approved by Article 29 Working Party under the 1995 legislation, and we're hoping our code will be the first approved under the new framework. And in the DMA UK code, we've essentially brought it into 5 principles that create a framework of behaviors and a culture that can be instituted. So going beyond the details of legislative requirements and giving something that every employee in a company can understand as a simple basis for going about their business. So, of course, the first principle is putting your customers first, understanding their needs, and offering compelling customer experience. But then others, respecting privacy, being honest and fair, taking responsibility, and being diligent with data. And those 5 principles add up to a relationship that's based on transparency and control. And I just wanted to share with you a short video of how one of our members in the UK has implemented their communication of their customer promise around data.
Why your data matters to us. Our owner, the Scott Trust, exists to secure the financial and editorial independence of The Guardian. Other than to cover expense, the Scott Trust takes no dividend from the business, ensuring all the profits are reinvested back into The Guardian and its award-winning journalism. One of the ways we generate revenue to safeguard our journalism for the future is by using your data. For example, when you sign into The Guardian's websites or use cookies when you browse, to make advertising more relevant to you. This enables us to charge advertisers money, which helps us keep the website open to all, while at the same time making The Guardian and Observer's own products and services more tailored to you. We have guidelines on our website which clearly explain how you can stay in control of the data you provide to us, as well as a place where you can manage your preferences, and a team who are dedicated to keeping any data you choose to share safe and secure. To create or manage your account, visit theguardian.com/your-account.
Okay, so I think that there's a couple of things to note there. First, clear, open, transparent, customer-friendly language and use of video. And I think we're seeing more and more customer charters in the UK being video-driven rather than complex written privacy policies that are full of legalese. And the average person just doesn't understand the language of lawyers. They need to understand the language of the brand in brand tone of voice. So it becomes part of your brand values, the way you communicate on privacy. So putting the customer first is nothing new. Our sector in data and marketing has evangelized about the opportunities to have a single customer view for a long time. And it's been an elusive ambition that should yield many commercial benefits and consumer benefits in terms of relevance, timeliness, efficiency, money saving, and so on. Companies want to be able to see transactional history, communications history, and every contact that they have had with a customer in one place. Well, GDPR essentially legislates for the single customer view. Companies must know what data they hold, how and why they collected it, and what they will use it for. They must be able to quickly fulfill subject access requests. And a company cannot do these things efficiently without a single customer view. So please, use GDPR as a catalyst to become more customer-centric companies, rather than thinking of it merely as a legal requirement. Thank you.
Chris, thank you so much, but don't leave the stage for 1 second, please. Now, first thing is I have to check if somebody from the audience might have any questions for you.
Oh, okay.
Now, raise your hand if you have a question. No coffee yet. You see, coffee makes IT business run around.
Coffee after my presentation.
Okay, but I have one short one for you. Now, in the slides where you showed all the differences between countries, and so I was really amazed that, you know, these are just flags, but how different we are in terms of perception of IT, of technology, of our privileges, of our rights, etc. One country in specific sticked out, and it was Netherlands. Now, would you believe that despite GDPR being a single European framework, like law, we will implement these things differently? Will not the businesses shift their geolocations, not based on a tax reforms, but since the data is the new currency, shifting their countries where they pay taxes from this point of view?
Okay, well, of course, we can get into many more issues besides use of data. So taxes is one, mental health concerns around social media or others, and so on. I don't think people will change location just because of GDPR and data protection, although our famous friends at Facebook did just move I think, 1.5 billion records of customers from Africa and Asia from Ireland back to the US, so that it was being processed under US data rather than GDPR. And that was after Mr. Zuckerberg told
and
Congress.
after he apologized.
So yeah, there will be some decisions taken, but I think essentially GDPR is going to be the essential element of a global data protection policy, and most international brands are starting to see it that way. So I don't think we'll see particular shifting for that reason, but I do think countries around the world, and certainly in Europe, need to come to grips with the tax issues and other reasons. But I don't think we'll go into that on a GDPR conference.
Okay, so it's not going that bad. Right. Chris, I would like to give you a nice certificate that says thank you very much for your great presentation from the organizers. Sirsnīgi aplausi.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris.